New Scotland Yard, synonymous with excellence in crime solving, recognised as a world leader in murder investigation. Every year, New Scotland Yard's experienced detectives unravel the twisted truth from the tragedies that unfold across the bustling capital city of London. Uncovering evidence that nails the guilty beyond all reasonable doubt takes time, dedication, and a forensic attention to detail. This is New Scotland Yard Files. Tonight, a much-loved, successful businesswoman discovered by her children on the living room floor. So badly beaten, they don't recognise her. But with no clues or even a prime suspect. How will New Scotland Yard discover the identity of her killer and get them off the streets before they can kill again? Kingston Vale, southwest London. It is 9 p.m. on the 29th of November 2006. A family comes together for an evening meal.
The children were coming home to have dinner with their mother that night, so they were in really good spirits. And it was Dina that came into the house first.
I knew as soon as I went in that there'd been an attack. I saw the blood on the bathroom floor, and I started screaming.
And the next thing she saw was this body lying on the floor, battered and bruised and covered in blood, so badly injured that she initially didn't even recognise that it was her own mother.
Police say Laila may have been followed home from the bus stop. They then say she may have opened her front door to her attacker. Son, daughter and daughter's boyfriend arrived at the house at around 9 o'clock. They found her unconscious on the floor with severe head injuries.
She was barely alive, making gurgling, I'm afraid, with the blood that was obviously in her airways, and she was in a desperate state.
Dina's boyfriend and her brother Tamar are both doctors. They administer first aid.
They did what they could to help her. She was just in a desperate state though. An ambulance was called. She was barely alive when she got to hospital.
The woman, Laila Rezk, is kept alive until her husband returns from abroad the following day. But life support is then withdrawn and she passes away as a result of her injuries. In 2006, Phil Adams was a detective in South London.
At the time that this occurred, I was a DCI, a senior investigating officer, on a murder team, and got a phone call that a lady had been seriously injured in an attack in Kingston. And we turned up to what I can only describe as a very, how can I say, dramatic scene.
The police officers arrived pretty swiftly after the emergency call. So the police officer constable who arrived could see the blood, could see in the hallway, in the downstairs lavatory, and generally around the floor.
The police forensics team get to work, revealing the grim choreography of what looks like a frenzied attack.
The door was ajar. There was blood trailed from the downstairs toilet as you go in the door on the left-hand side. Horrific sight there of blood splattered all over the walls, blood trail from where Mrs. Rezk had been dragged from the downstairs toilet into the lounge. And there was some sort of damage within the lounge, if you like. The curtain pole had been pulled down.
It's a chaotic, confusing crime scene. How did Laila Rezk come to die in her own home? The part of southwest London where the murder takes place has one of the lowest crime rates in the city.
It was an area where professional people lived with their families. The houses were big, often detached. It was leafy, wealthy, professional, quiet, and to all intents and purposes safe.
For the police, the brutality of the murder is a major concern.
There's one thing as a senior investigating officer that amongst many things that you always worry about, is that if you don't catch this person soon, somebody else could get hurt. It concerned me massively that somebody that could be this violent to a woman that would never have used violence.
This killing is a genuine whodunit. At first glance, there is no indication whether the victim knew the murderer or not.
Detectives say Laila Rezk had been viciously attacked. She was left unconscious but alive, lying in a pool of blood, and was later discovered by her 20-year-old son, her daughter and her daughter's boyfriend.
And having entered the premises, they found her lying in the living room with her head in the hall, having sustained very serious head and facial injuries.
You can't imagine the distress on all the family there as they turned up.
This violent attack on a middle-aged woman in her own home shook the peaceful neighbourhood.
It was an incredibly brutal murder. It caused unrest with the local residents. People were very nervous.
If you don't have a car, I mean, you've got to use a bus, so...
There should be signs on every bus stop saying that this is potentially something, well, this is happening in the area right now. So, yeah, quite angry.
It's the first time anything like this has ever happened. We've lived here over 40 years.
Like any offence of this nature, when there's no known or obvious suspect, and there's obviously great concern for everybody, the police, the community at large, that there is somebody who is still out there who's committed this offence.
And for the police, the fear is always that whoever's responsible will strike again. With no obvious clues to the killer's identity, New Scotland Yard detectives begin with the first step in any investigation. Know your victim. Who was Laila Rezk?
So she was married. She'd actually that year been married 25 years, and her husband was called Morris, and she had the 2 children. Her daughter was actually doing a PhD at Cambridge, and her son was training to be a doctor.
She had all the gracefulness and all the social skills that you could ever need in someone, to be a great mother, to be a great friend.
Laila Rezk was described by everybody as a caring, beautiful, kind lady.
Among the first to pay tribute was her neighbour and friend of more than 20 years.
She was a lovely, loving person. She loved her children and she worked extremely hard. And she was a lovely neighbour as well. We used to have chats on the doorstep, you know, over the fence chats, and, you know, we would just be friendly with each other.
I think people have been very shocked. Some people are frightened by what's happened, but I think mainly just a real concern for the family.
To build up a picture of how Laila died, detectives use evidence found at the crime scene to piece together her final moments. It is clear that she had put up a fight.
My initial response to the scene was there's an element of violence there. From the drag marks, it was clear that the murder had taken place within the downstairs toilet. So my first impressions were that she'd been surprised, if you like, coming out of the toilet, had been attacked there and then been dragged into the lounge.
Her injuries were the result of extreme violence. When her daughter found her in the hallway, she wasn't sure the person on the floor was her mother.
The injuries Laila had suffered were significant. Her face was barely recognisable. She had a great big lesion to her forehead, and the reality is that her head had been smashed against a hard, flat surface a number of times.
Even though the wounds to Laila's face were terrible, most were survivable, but it was a blow to the front of her head that proved fatal.
The impact at the front had caused damage to the brain and to the spinal cord, and the reality is that's what killed her, amongst all the other injuries that she'd received.
So police now know how Laila died. Their attention turns to immediate possible suspects. One of the first lines to pursue in a murder investigation, where a body is discovered in the home, is to look into those closest to the victim.
I mean, it certainly crossed my mind, and I had to have as an option of the potential suspect for the murder that it could have been a family member or the husband.
Despite the extreme distress of the family, New Scotland Yard need to consider Laila's husband Morris as part of their inquiries.
Well, Morris had to be eliminated as a suspect because he was the closest person to her, and of course, in these cases, often the victim is murdered by someone they know.
Spouses are statistically highly likely to be the culprit. Psychologically, there's something about the severe intimacy that people experience within a marriage that somehow also, on the flip side, opens up a person to the possibility of the fullest expression of human fury as well. When the circumstances allow, the fullest expression of fury can result in murder.
What is potentially significant to investigators is that at the time of her death, Laila's marriage was breaking down.
The couple were going through a divorce after 25 years of marriage.
Mr. Rezk and the family clearly had a reasonable amount of money. There had been this issue that some money had been left to Laila and it had gone to the children.
Their relationship was coming to an end, and was this the reason that Laila had been killed? Police had to rule that out. They began by looking at her husband, but of course he was away in Cairo at the time.
But for a price, there is always a way to get an intermediary to carry out this type of dirty work.
Perfect alibi. I'm out in Egypt, I pay for somebody back in London to kill my wife, and I'm innocent, and then I inherit all the money. But these are all conjecture. This is all conjecture. But as an investigating officer, you have to consider every line of inquiry.
Was the murderer a killer for hire? The police explore the possibility of Laila's murder being a contract killing. Her husband Morris flies back from Egypt and is at his wife's bedside when she passes away.
It was a terrible feeling. It's the worst 12 hours of my life. From the time my daughter phoned me and said, probably this will be the last time you see my mother or you see Laila. From then everything stopped in my brain except coming to London.
Out of respect for the distraught family, the police hold off questioning Morris until they have exhausted other lines of inquiry.
I still didn't feel it was a right thing to do, to put him in a position where he might have been questioned from the point of view of being suspected. So I was very firm on that.
If Morris was behind the killing, it would have to have been carried out by a contract killer, as he was in Egypt at the time. But criminal psychologist Dr. Donna Youngs believes Laila's murder has none of the hallmarks of a professional hit.
This crime scene was not indicative of a contract killing. The emotionality, the frenzied nature, the anger driven by the person actually carrying out the murder suggests that it was about something for him rather than him simply carrying out a contract, a job for another second party.
Looking for other evidence, the police turned to CCTV of Laila's final journey home. Fortunately for them, she followed the same route back from work every day.
Laila Rezk worked as a customer services manager at an in-flight entertainment company at Covent Garden. Her journey home every night was complicated, but it always followed a set pattern. And on Wednesday, the day she was attacked, as usual, she came here to Waterloo Station to take a train. After a 16-minute journey, Mrs. Rezk would emerge here onto Putney High Street, where she had this very short walk to this stop and to catch her bus home. Mrs. Rezk would have got off the bus at this stop, just a short distance from her home. It was 2 to 3 minutes walk from the bus stop, and she went home as normal. There was nothing unusual about her journey that day, but it ended tragically.
Knowing Laila's route through London, the police pore over CCTV from her last journey home.
Now, one possibility detectives are looking into is that her attacker was on the same bus.
We had to follow up lines of inquiries on associates, work associates, or anybody else that we picked up on CCTV, because we had a massive CCTV trawl on buses and the routes back, which takes hours and hours of research, retrieval and viewing. Could it be somebody who taken a liking to her, was a stalker? It could have been somebody from work that liked her from a distance. It could have been somebody on the bus or on a journey home that had taken a liking to her. We did have some information that a couple of weeks previously a lady had been followed by a stranger off the bus not too far from there.
In a crowded city like London, women can sometimes suffer unwanted attention from fellow passengers. The police wonder if Laila might have been followed home by a stalker.
The daily commute is a ripe opportunity for the internal development of the stalking process. A vulnerable, lonely person can develop an emotional attachment to somebody that they see regularly as part of their routine activities. And their need for human interaction can be so profound that they start to misinterpret the behaviour of this person that they are seeing on a regular basis.
The police cannot rule out a violent stalker attack, so they track her movements in fine detail.
I ensured that all the CCTV following her route from where she worked in Covent Garden, all the way through the streets, all the way to the train station, all the way to on a bus, and all the way from the bus to where she got off the bus at the end of Robin Hood Lane, and then anything else, including houses that have CCTV.
After collecting the CCTV footage of Laila, the police decide to release it to the public to see if anyone can identify her fellow passengers.
Obviously, one possibility we're looking at is that she may have even been followed by someone on the bus or someone who saw her get off the bus. Obviously, anybody who was on that bus, it's an 85 bus, between 7:21 and 7:42, we'd be very keen to talk to them.
A key turning point in this investigation is when police released that CCTV of Laila on the bus, showing her travelling on the number 85 from Putney Railway Station up to Robin Hood roundabout.
These CCTV shots are the last images of 51-year-old Laila Rezk alive.
She looked relaxed, happy. She was going home. There was nothing unusual in her behaviour, but it was something the public could focus on, something the police could appeal around. And, you know, they wanted to know, had you seen her? Had you seen anyone following her? And of course, they were worried that somebody on the bus had actually followed her.
And we know, Ronke, that police are studying that CCTV footage from the number 85 bus. Have they managed to trace everyone who was on the bus yet?
Well, yes, Katie, as you say, the CCTV footage from the bus is absolutely excellent. You actually see Laila getting on the bus at Putney Station. And initially she stands at the bottom of the stairs. After a few stops, she sits down. And then quite unusually, a bit later on, she moves seats. She stays in that seat until she gets off here at this bus stop behind me. Now, when she got off, 3 other people got off. And commuters who travel on that route, especially women, say they're quite concerned that the killer is caught and caught very soon.
CCTV clearly shows a group of men beside Laila as she approaches her stop.
So while Laila's travelling on the bus, in the background we can see there are 3 men on the bus, and very quickly 2 of them are eliminated from the inquiry. But there's one the police can't identify, so they come to the media to put out an appeal to find out who this man was. He was known as Man C, and the appeal was, do you know this man? They needed to rule him out of the investigation before they could move forward.
It's 2 whole weeks since Laila Rezk's death. Police don't seem to have a great deal to go on at the moment, but they're still working on the theory that she may have been followed home by her assailant, perhaps even onto the 85 bus itself, between Putney and this very bus stop here. They want to speak to a man in his 60s, white-haired, very stocky and carrying a blue folder, who was pictured on CCTV getting off that bus at the same time as Laila. He still hasn't come forward. If you are that individual or if you know him, then please contact the police.
Alongside this appeal to help identify man C, detectives continue their search for witnesses who may have seen Laila on the night of her murder.
They're hoping to rekindle people's memories. She's a very distinctive looking woman, and she was wearing a very distinctive long brown leather coat. And what they're hoping is people who were here last week will remember seeing her or someone acting suspiciously.
Within days, the identity of man C is revealed.
There was a guy who came forward and identified, yes, that's me. And he was an innocent person who travels that route all the time. So that man was identified. He was somebody who normally travelled on the bus, and there was absolutely no suspicion around him whatsoever. So we were able to clear him of any concerns regarding the inquiry.
With man C identified and eliminated, the murder of Laila remains a classic whodunit.
Police are keeping an open mind about a motive for the attack, and Laila's family are pleading for help to catch her killer.
With no new leads, the family make an appeal via the media.
There's no way of describing what this has done to our family, to our entire community. And maybe he's not evil, maybe he's just stupid, maybe he was mindless, maybe it was a big mistake. These are all going to be difficult things for us to deal with, but the point is we have to know.
The appeal fails to produce any useful information.
Most murders are solved very quickly. Actually, within 24 hours, the police are able to get all the evidence together, the leads are there, and they call it the golden 24 hours. Everything comes together very quickly, and they usually have their suspects in custody within a day.
Despite all the CCTV investigation we did, all the house and witness appeal inquiries, they didn't identify anything as a specific name of a stalker.
With no results and a terrified community, detectives weigh up the different scenarios that could explain Laila's death. To solve a crime so mysterious, they have to investigate with open minds.
I still couldn't rule out the fact that it could have been a stalker. So that remains all the time running alongside that line of inquiry whilst we're looking at the family members, the husband, and then whilst we're looking at burglars. So all of these lines of inquiry are running parallel and constantly moving.
Police also had to consider the condition in which Laila's body was found. It gave detectives a particularly disturbing line of inquiry.
Laila was lying in a pool of blood, and her skirt had been pulled up almost to her waist, and her top had also been pulled up. Her breasts were exposed.
The fact Laila was not wearing underwear and her breasts were exposed suggests there could have been a sexual dimension to the murder.
I wasn't sure whether there'd been any sexual assault because of the nature of her clothing. Her underwear was nearby, so I was concerned as to whether she had been sexually assaulted.
New Scotland Yard Murder Squad asked the pathologist to look for evidence of a sexual attack.
I ensured that at the hospital, whilst Laila was there, that we were able to get, with the family's authority, swabs from Laila to try and identify whether there had been any sexual assault.
But no such evidence is discovered by the pathologist.
On closer examination of the scene, even before all the forensic examination had been undertaken, it did give a reasonably clear indication that she must have been in the downstairs lavatory and appears to have been attacked there or thereabouts by the attacker having come into the premises and then dragged feet first. Her clothes were dishevelled by being moved across the floor into the living room.
So with a sexual assault ruled out, detectives now consider other motives.
So my feelings were, it's more likely to be a burglar who is opportunist, found their way into the house, But the only thing that gave me concern is that she had lots of valuables still on her person. There were cards, credit cards, as a handbag had been tipped out over her.
A break-in where no valuables are taken further complicates the picture for police. Investigators hope that figuring out how the attacker got into the house will give them a vital clue.
Nobody had forced entry to that premises. So either Laila knew who it was and let them in, either they had keys themselves, or the door was open and they let themselves in.
Whichever hypothesis is correct, the police need rock-solid forensic evidence to identify the killer. The trouble is, the crime scene is a forensic challenge.
But you've got to bear in mind with here, we're not turning up to a scene that is fresh from when the murderer has left it and walked away. Because that would make life a lot easier. Because what we'd had by the time we got there was the family, understandably, had moved things about. They touched things, they'd stood on things, they tried to revive Laila. The police officers, the ambulance rather, turn up and they do the same.
So fingerprint examination became particularly relevant. Again, very difficult in a domestic premises. You have to get the family's fingerprints, close friends' fingerprints, to eliminate all the usual prints will be around the house.
The forensic team begin the huge task of looking for what amounts to a needle in a haystack, the killer's fingerprints.
By the time that we finished forensicating the house, we must have retrieved hundreds of fingerprints.
To rule each and every fingerprint out, police have to get prints from anyone who's ever been to the house.
Including police officers, London Ambulance Service, from the family, which again is traumatic, bless them, bearing in mind what they've been through. And then all of those have to be identified and compared, and these things take time.
But as the police sift through the fingerprints, linking them to known friends, family and visitors, they find one which they cannot identify.
The breakthrough came when forensic teams found a single thumbprint on the key which was still in the lock of the house here in Kingston Vale.
And it is printed in Laila's blood. The unidentified fingerprint has been found on a bent key. The key is in the lock on the inside of the front door. But there's a problem. It is only a partial fingerprint.
The problem is that we had quite a few partial prints on different things that were quite relevant, such as things within the handbag. And some of these things you can put through computers and some you can't. So it took quite some time for the guys at the lab to identify that partial fingerprint.
I think in his panic to leave the house, his sleeve has slipped back up his arm, and therefore when he's grabbed the key, that's the one print that he's left on the whole premises.
The police run the fingerprints through their extensive database, looking for a match.
Convicted criminals have their fingerprints taken, they're kept on the National Fingerprint Database. And so therefore, when we have fingerprints at crime scenes, then we run those fingerprints through the system to see if we get a match on a trace of convicted criminals.
So detectives now have this enormous task of linking that single bloody thumbprint to a suspect. They had to trawl their records and try and find out who it belonged to.
With millions of prints in the system, police faced a daunting task. But they had top analysts on the case, determined to get results.
The important work there was done by a specific gentleman up at the lab who spent absolute hours on that one mark. And really, only because of his fabulous work was the suspect identified.
After retrieving a useful image of the partial print from the key and ensuring that it will stand up in court, they find a match with 18-year-old Lloyd Edwards.
He had a number of convictions, primarily for burglary. His modus operandi will be to break in, go to the kitchen, pick up a knife in case he was disturbed.
Lloyd Edwards was a prolific, opportunist burglar, and he'd been in trouble with the police since he was 10.
He's into sort of drink and drugs, low-key thief, but prolific.
But these convictions were all around burglary and theft. It was uncharacteristic of him to be involved in such a shockingly violent crime.
Nevertheless, it's Lloyd Edwards' print that is on the key found in Laila's home. But when police investigate this known offender, there's a surprise. It turns out he's already behind bars.
The time that we finally got the identification via the fingerprint department that he was already in prison and was on remand for a burglary.
So Lloyd Edwards is in prison. But back in November 2006, when Laila was murdered, he was out walking the streets. Detectives have to consider that Edwards' criminality may have escalated from burglary to murder.
The worry is that he is a burglar that's just used violence. He's become a little bit desensitized with it and could do the same again and again and again.
But while detectives are building a case against Edwards, a disturbing discovery is made. At the time of Laila's murder, he was officially under police supervision.
We found out that Edwards had been released early from an 18-month detention and training order, and he was still wearing a tag at the time he attacked Laila. He was on a curfew, so he should actually have been at home and not out wandering the streets.
How did the probation service allow an offender like Edwards out on the streets with only a tag for public protection? The lack of control over a known and tagged offender like Lloyd Edwards raises questions into the effectiveness of tagging.
When you're tagged, there's a record of where you are at any given time, and he was supposed to have a curfew to be within his address at a certain time. It didn't help us. That just didn't help us. It is not, I don't feel, effective, because the people that have got the tags on can still go and commit crime. And that's what happened in this case. He's a tagged man. If he was on remand, this would never have happened.
It becomes clear that Edwards' tag activated a safe signal at his father's house on the night of the murder. But after he had clocked in and maintained his curfew in the eyes of the law, he went out again in search of a house to burgle on a night that ended in tragedy. Lloyd Edwards is immediately questioned by the police.
And the evidence that we had was put before him. He then made a prepared statement and was suggesting that he went in to the house. She confronted him. She wouldn't stop screaming, so he punched her. And then she wouldn't stop screaming again, so I think he said he punched her 2 more times, at which point she went quiet. And he then said he went and searched the house. He made no reference whatsoever to ever having been in the downstairs toilet.
Edwards' admission of burglary and assault eliminates all other suspects, but he avoids any mention of the protracted beating that killed Laila. To the police, it's clear that he's playing a calculated game.
So these are things where he's trying to mitigate his actual involvement from the point of view of manslaughter, not murder.
Murder is defined as killing with intent. Manslaughter, which can carry a much lighter sentence, is unintended killing. So when Edwards makes a point of his training as a boxer, the police suspect he is preparing the ground for a manslaughter plea.
He did say that he'd done some boxing in the past and considered himself to be quite fit, trying to use that as an excuse for the fact that she had received such serious injuries from his blows. I think that, you know, I'm such a good boxer. Look at me, I hit her 3 times, and gosh, that's what happened. The reality is that he was just a vicious, horrible man, and viciously attacked her.
Detectives have a confession, but the prosecution now have to prove that Edwards intended to kill Laila. The murder trial of Lloyd Edwards will be a test for the prosecution. He has entered a plea of manslaughter, but the prosecution feel that they have built a case that will convince the court he entered the house intending to kill, or at least seriously injure Laila Rezk. But the decision will be in the hands of the jury. In court, Lloyd Edwards follows through with his strategy. He pleads guilty to manslaughter.
In the trial, Edwards tried to suggest that he didn't intend at all to cause serious harm to Laila, that he'd struck her several times with a punch just to keep her quiet. That's all he tried to do.
Edwards' plea paints him as a burglar who does not know his own strength. Criminal barrister Richard Whittam sees the plea for what it is.
Often in a case, it's accepted that whoever did it, if it's a whodunit case, whoever did it committed murder, it wasn't me. Here was a young man saying it was me, but I didn't have this intention.
For Whittam, a step-by-step walkthrough of the forensic evidence is the best way to ensure Edwards' false account is properly exposed.
So it was very important to go through the level of injuries that she'd suffered, precisely where the blood was in and around that downstairs lavatory, how she'd been dragged and moved.
It is time for the hard facts to be presented to the court. Using the forensic data, Whittam gives the jury a blow-by-blow account of the beating endured by Laila.
This was a particularly violent incident, even in the context of murder cases, that the injuries to her face were significant. She either had been surprised while she'd been in the downstairs lavatory or had just come out of the lavatory, one thing or the other, and been attacked, whether she was struck in the face first.
The blood marks and spatters contradict Edwards' claim that he had only punched Laila 3 times. They demonstrate, without any room for doubt, that he'd repeatedly smashed Laila's face with great force into the tiled walls of the bathroom.
She'd been literally rammed into the opposite wall in the lavatory a number of times. There was contact blood in the lavatory on the walls. There was aspirated blood on the walls. There was smeared blood and bits of hair as well, I'm afraid, and blood on the doorways on the way out and dragged across the floor. So it had been a particularly vicious assault.
The blood spatter and shoe marks reveal that she was dragged into the hall.
She was lying in a pool of blood in the living room that was just short of, well, more than 1 metre wide, just less than, in imperial measurements, 4 feet.
As she lies fatally wounded, Edwards rifles through Laila's bag, emptying the contents over her body.
He must have seen that he'd inflicted horrific injuries to her. Her face was so damaged, he would have known that she is severely injured. So he could have made a decision there and then to maybe, I don't know, call for help or something like that. It must have been clear to him there's potential that lady could die as he was leaving the premises.
It becomes very clear how utterly senseless the killing of Laila Rezk was.
Some people use a phrase, happenstance. In this particular case, that there was no motive for Laila being the victim. She was a middle-aged professional woman who'd come home from work, just happened to leave her door ajar. And at the same time, or moments later, an 18-year-old, I'll call him a man, an 18-year-old man who should have been at home or his father's premises on a curfew, being electronically monitored, had decided to come out to commit a burglary. He happened upon the door that was ajar and then attacked Laila in this most horrendous way.
Thankfully, the brutal detail presented to the jury demolishes Edwards' manslaughter plea.
The prosecution, we were able to prove that the level of violence through forensic evidence, the blood pattern analysis, the pathology that there is no way those injuries could have been caused by superficial blows from a punch, if you like, that they were committed by somebody who wanted to inflict serious, grievous violence and injury to somebody. And fortunately, we were able to prove that at court.
Edwards, now 19 years old, is sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Laila Rezk.
A teenage burglar who murdered a woman in her home in southwest London has today been jailed for life, with a recommendation that he serve at least 18 years.
The final images of Laila on her bus journey home from work. As she entered her home in Kingston Vale, opportunist burglar Lloyd Edwards followed her inside and brutally attacked her. When the 52-year-old was discovered a short time later by her children, she was so badly injured they couldn't even recognise her. Laila was taken to hospital but never recovered.
For criminal psychologist Dr. Donna Youngs, the fury of Edwards' attack is the key to understanding how something so terrible could have happened.
I think that as part of the burglary, there was something about Laila that triggered within Lloyd this revenger narrative.
The revenger narrative is a psychological script that can guide the actions of certain offenders. In this case, Edwards, a social misfit who felt wronged by society, takes his anger out on those who he thinks possess what he can never have.
Within him triggered the fury that he was keeping barely suppressed. Something about her reaction, something about her style, something about her polished, immaculate presentation, something about her wealth even, that activated the fury that Lloyd was harbouring.
For Phil Adams, who worked for decades on London murders, putting Edwards away has made the capital a safer place.
I think he knew what he'd done. And there is part of me that thinks, thank God that we have got him and he is inside. Because if he's done that once, I do feel that the barriers have dropped then. And once you've done something like that once, you will do it again.
Stranger murders like the Laila Rezk case are usually extremely challenging and often the most disturbing.
This case highlights the seldom but almost more frightening aspect of stranger murders. Laila was doing nothing wrong and yet she became a victim. It just shows that none of us is immune to violence.
This was truly a senseless and random killing. Sadly, one that could happen to anyone, anywhere.